Welcome back and welcome to part 2 of this Stylized Hot Dog Blender tutorial series. If you haven't seen the previous part where we modeled the hot dog, definitely check that out with the link in the description. And in this part we're going to be doing the UV unwrapping and the texture painting and the materials, and then we'll be finishing up the scene and getting the final render. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel, you can also purchase the project files on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. I'll have the links to that in the description if you're interested. Now if you like creating stylized or toon style artworks in Blender, then you might be interested in checking out this really cool Blender product for adding toon style effects to your 3D scenes. CelesTools is a really cool Blender product for adding toon style effects to your artworks in Blender. The product comes with 7 different effects created with geometry nodes. The effects are asset browser ready, so you can just set up the product in the asset browser and then just drag and drop the effects into your 3D scenes. The product comes with a constellation effect, some cool stardust, some different stars, and some pearls, a particle fill which you can add to objects, as well as a rainbow and a halo effect. You can find my full add-on review video with the link in the description, and if you purchase the add-on through my affiliate link, you'll be helping to support this channel. So we're going to start off by texture painting the hot dog. So I'm going to select the hot dog, and then I'll press Shift H. Why I'm pressing Shift H is because the H key is going to hide the selection, but if you press Shift H, that's going to hide everything else. So I'm just going to hide everything else, but just keep the hot dog. And I'll go back to the solid view. Now I want to UV unwrap this before we texture paint it, so we need to go here to the UV editing workspace. This is going to take us into edit mode, and I can zoom in here, and then over here we have the UV editor. So I'll press the A key to select all the mesh, and you can see it does already have a UV unwrap. That's because we added a cylinder object, and the cylinder already had a UV map, but I want to re-UV unwrap this because we modeled more pieces, so there's going to be some overlap. So we need to re-UV unwrap the mesh. So in edit mode, you're going to select all the mesh, and you're going to hit the U button, and we're just going to choose the Smart UV Project. Now on the Smart UV Project settings, we want to turn up this island margin, and this is going to make sure that there's a little bit of space between the islands in the UV editor. So I'm going to turn the island margin to a 0.01. That's going to make sure there isn't any overlapping, and I'll click on OK. So it's going to UV unwrap it, so you can see what it's done here, and if I zoom in, you can see there is a little bit of space in between the islands, and so when we're texture painting, the texture painting will overlap the other island. So you can see there's like these big parts here, and then these parts here are like the ends of the hot dog. So that'll be great for the texture painting. Now, before we actually jump into texture painting, we need to add a material and then add an image to paint. So let's click over here to go to the shading workspace, and I'll zoom into the object, and we have the shader editor right here. So I'll click on new to add a new material, and I can just rename this to hot dog. So I need to add a new texture that we can paint on. So I'll go to the add menu, and let's search for an image texture. We'll drop it here, and let's put the color up to the base color. Now we need to add a new image that we can paint on. So we're going to click on new here, and right here on the name, I'll rename this to hot dog color. Now the width and height here is the pixel resolution, and on default it is a 1K texture. I'm going to go with a 2K texture, so I'm going to go with 2048. So 2048 on the top one and 2048 on the bottom one. And then on the color here, we can create the base color that we want to start out painting. So if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using, you can click on the color, you can go to the hex value, and you can punch in 973817. Hit enter, and that's going to be the hot dog color that I'm going to be using. So it's kind of a dark reddish brownish color. Let's click on new image. So now that's already going into the base color, so we'll be able to preview it on the object. If you hold down the Z button, go into the material preview, you can actually see what it looks like, or also the rendered viewport mode. So now we can actually texture paint this. So let's click over here to go to Blender's texture painting workspace. And over here, we have the UV editor, and you can actually see the painted map. You can see it flat. And then right over here, it's brought us into texture painting mode in the 3D viewport. So we can actually paint on the 3D model. So I'm going to click right here and drag over and make this smaller because we don't really need the flat view. I'm just going to be painting in the 3D viewport. And let's also click here to go to the default draw brush so we can paint. And also you could use a drawing tablet if you want to for the texture painting. I do have a drawing tablet which I sometimes use for texture painting, but in this case it's going to be pretty simple. We're pretty much just going to be changing a few of the colors and maybe adding a few little areas where it looks a bit burnt or a bit toasted or grilled. So I'm just going to be using my mouse for this, but you could definitely use a drawing tablet if you'd like to. So I want to first choose the color that I'll be painting with. So I want to paint this color, but it's going to be slightly brighter on either one of the edges. So what I can do is click here on this color here, and then we're going to click on the eyedropper. Then we're going to click somewhere right here to choose that same color. And then if we click on the color here, we could just make it slightly brighter. First though, I want to add this to the color palette just in case I want to go back to it. So if I open up the color palette here, I can click on new to add a new color palette, and then I'll click on the plus here, and that's going to add that color. That's going to be the base color of the hot dog. So let's now click on the color here, and we can make it just a little bit brighter, so something like that. And then I can click on the plus here again, and that's going to add that slightly brighter color. So you can see if I click here between the colors, I can quickly go back and forth between the two colors I want to use. Now you can also change the radius and strength of your brush here. You can also press the F key and drag your mouse and then click to change the radius of the brush. And I also want to take the strength and make it quite a bit less strong. You can also press Shift F, and that is going to change the strength of the brush, but I'll just drag it down here so it's more subtle. Now before we actually start painting, I do want to turn on the bleed, because if we don't turn up the bleed a little bit, then you might be able to see some of the edges on the side of the UV map. So if I open this up and kind of zoom in here, basically where we paint on the 3D model, if that goes to the edge of the UV map, there might be a little bit of bleeding issues if it doesn't move over the UV map far enough, and so you might be able to see a little bit of a glitch on the UV map. So let's scroll down here, and we're going to open up the options, and then you can see here there's a bleed setting, and on default it's set to 2 pixels. I'm going to make it a little bit higher to 5 pixels just because I find that occasionally 2 pixels isn't quite enough. So now I can make this smaller, and we can just start to make the edges of the hot dog a little bit brighter. So the strength of the brush is very low, so I can just now click along here, and I could even make the strength a little bit less strong, and now I can just kind of move along here and just click just to add a little bit of color here, just to make the edges of the hot dog a little bit brighter. And if you look over here on the UV map, you can see right there on the edges, and right there it's just looking a little bit brighter. So let's just zoom in here. I want it to be pretty subtle because I don't want to notice it too much, but I can just make it slightly brighter. Let's go to the other side here and we can do the same thing. So I'm just kind of clicking, and because we have the strength really low, it'll just add a little bit. So I can just continue to click as many times as I need just to make it slightly brighter. And also here, let's go along here, kind of zoom in and just click along there. And then it is a little bit hard to see, but occasionally there might be a little bit of a rough spot. So if you want to, you could use the soften brush or the smear brush, and you can kind of soften it. So I'll choose this soften brush, make my brush bigger, and just go along here. I find this brush is a little bit laggy in Blender. It would be nice in future versions of Blender if they improved the performance of these brushes, because they can be a little bit laggy. You could also try the smear brush, make my brush bigger, and you can see it is kind of subtle, so it's a little bit hard to see, but you can kind of smear it. If there's anything which is looking a little bit rough, you can kind of smear it and blur it a bit. So very subtle, but now the edges are slightly lighter. So now what I want to do is create a custom brush, and then we will use that custom brush to make the hot dog look like it's kind of has some grill marks. So let's click right here to select the draw brush, and you can actually click right up here. You can see that there are different brushes. On default, there's just one. You can also get to those brushes right there, but what I'm going to be doing is duplicating it, and then we'll be creating a custom brush setting. So let's just click on this button here, which is kind of looks like these two paper icons. So click on that, and now if I click here, you can see there are 2 of them. Now in this one, I can click on this, and I can just call this like grilled or burnt or toasted, whatever you want to call it. So we have the default one, but then we have the grilled one. So now we can change the settings of the brush, and then we can paint the little grill marks. So for this brush, I want to make it fully white. So if we click right up here on the color, we can go to the RGB here, and we can make the red, green, and blue values all the way to fully white. And then if you want to add this to the color palette, you can click on the plus here to add it to the color palette, so you can go back to it if you want to. So I know it seems weird that we're making it white. You might think that we want to make it black, but I'll show you why we're doing that in a moment. So I now want to add a noise texture or a clouds texture to this brush so that when we paint, it just looks a little bit noisy and it'll give it a cool grilled effect. So right now with the default brush, it's just going to be really smooth. If I make my brush smaller and then paint along here, let me actually make the strength bigger, you can see it's going to be nice and smooth. But I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to open up texture, and we're going to click on new to add a new texture to the brush. Now if we click on this button here, this is going to go over to the texturing panel, and on default there is image or movie, so this way you could add in an external file on your computer, so an image, but I'm going to use Blender's procedural noise instead. So if we click on the drop down, we can choose the clouds, which is the same thing as Blender's procedural noise texture. You can see there's the preview of it, and I want to change the size. So the size I'm going to turn to a 1.05, so it's bigger, and then this depth here I'll turn all the way up to 24, and this will make it more detailed. So now I can click right back up here to the active tool and workspace settings, and you can see there is the texture. So if I start to paint here, you can actually see we're painting that noise. Let's press Ctrl Z though to undo that. Now to make this work correctly so it just paints the dark parts of this noise, we can go up here to the settings, and on the blend type right here, we're going to change this to multiply. And then of course it's really important that you make it fully white. So because the brush is fully white and we've set the blend type to multiply, if I draw here, you can see it's only going to add the dark values of this noise. So that's why I'm making it fully white. So let me press Ctrl Z to undo that. You can of course change the radius and the strength of your brush, but let me just turn the strength way down, and then I will make the radius a little bit bigger. And we're going to start by making the hot dog look just a little bit toasted. So we can just click along here, and you can see because my brush is very subtle, we're just going to make it look like it's been a little bit toasted and cooked, kind of on a barbecue grill. So just going along here, pretty subtle, but just making some little dark areas. All right there, maybe down here on the bottom. Just a few spots here and there. I don't want to overdo it, but just kind of a subtle effect. That will look pretty cool. All right, and then once you're done with that, then we can actually add the grilled spot. So let me just add a little bit more here and there, something like that. All right, so we can now add the grill marks. So to add the grill marks, I will make my brush smaller, but we're going to be using the same brush. So we're going to leave it as white. We're going to leave these settings how they are, but we're going to turn the strength up much higher. So I'll turn the strength maybe up to like a 0.8 or something like that. And I'll zoom in here. And now I can just go along here and I can kind of click, or I can click and drag, and I can add those grill marks. So I'm going to have it kind of going diagonally. I think that looks kind of cool. And just going along here, kind of darkening it in like that, kind of over here. All right, like that. Going along here. You can even have a few little areas here and there that look slightly more burnt. Maybe turn the strength down, just add a few little dots here. If you want to make a few more little burnt areas, all right, maybe like there. I'll turn the strength up a little bit more, and then we can continue to go along here and just add those cool grill marks. And right here, getting to the very end, I'll just add another small one there. All right, and then I'll make my brush really weak again, turn the strength down, and I can just go along here and add a few smaller areas. So a few smaller, darker areas just here and there along the hot dog. And that's really it. So that's gonna add some cool grill marks to the hot dog. Now, once you're done with the texture painting, it's really important that you save the painted image, because if we close the Blender file, Blender's not going to save the texture painted image. So we'll open up this UV editor over here, or this is actually the image editor, and here is the image that we painted. So we need to click on image, and we can click on save as. I'll just save this in the folder with my other project files as hot dog color. I'll just save it as a PNG image, and then just click on save as image. And you can see there was a little star right there on image, but it's now disappeared, and that's telling us that we've actually saved this image. Let's press Ctrl S to save the file, and we can go back over here to the layout. And I will press Alt H. Alt H is going to bring back all of the objects, and I can go into the rendered viewport mode just to see that. Now I want to do some things in the shader editor to make this material look a bit better. So let's click right over here to go to the shading workspace. And I'll go into the rendered viewport mode so I can see it. Let's also select some of these objects and just press H to hide them, just to get them out of the way. Maybe this here, just hide that, because I want to be able to see the hot dog a little bit better. All right, so I'm going to bring this hot dog out here, and what I first want to do is add an ambient occlusion, and that'll make some of the edges a bit darker, and it'll make the edges darker when it's close to another object. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the ambient occlusion node, and we'll put this above the color. And if I Control Shift and select the ambient occlusion, you can't really see it doing much right now, but if I press Alt H to bring back those objects, you can see when it's next to the bun, it's going to be a bit darker there, and that'll give it kind of a nice stylized shading effect. So what I want to do is mix this into the color. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for the mix color node, and we'll put it here after the hot dog color, just stick it there. And then the ambient occlusion color, this is going to go into the factor. Now we just want to add the dark values. So on the mix type here, we're going to change this to the darken. And then here on color B, we can just make this fully black. So if I control shift and select the darken, it's basically just going to add the dark values from the ambient occlusion. However, it's kind of doing the opposite effect. So here in the corners and crevices, it looks a bit lighter. So we just need to invert the color. So I'll go to the add menu and we can search for an invert color, and we'll just stick it here after the ambient occlusion. So now you can see that that edge there looks a bit darker because it's close to the hot dog bun. So if I control shift and select this, you can preview it. And if I control shift and select the darken there, you can see it looks darker. So that's what it looks like before and after. And also if you hold down the control and shift key and select the different nodes and it's not previewing it, that is because I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on. So you can click on edit, you can go to the preferences, and if you go here to the add-ons tab, you can go to the search and you can search for the Node Wrangler, and you can click on the check mark there to turn on the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's built in a Blender. So I'll close the preferences. So if you hold down the control and shift key and then select different nodes, that's going to plug the material output directly up to the node, so you'll be able to preview what just that node looks like. So I'll control shift and select the principled shader. Now over here on the principled shader, I do want to change some of the settings. So on the roughness, I'll turn this up to a 0.6 so it's not quite as shiny. It'll be a little bit more rough. And then also I want to turn on some subsurface to make it look a little bit more like food and make it look a bit more like fleshy meat. So I'm going to open up the subsurface here and I'll turn the weight all the way up to 1. And we'll just wait for that to load up. So the subsurface is going to make it look a little bit more smooth and a little bit more soft. Now I also want to click on the type here, and I'm going to change it to the random walk skin, because this will kind of give it a skin effect of the subsurface scattering. And because the hot dog is made out of meat, the skin type works really well. And then also the radius here, these are the red, green, and blue values of the subsurface scattering. I'm going to turn the top one here to 2. That's going to add a bit more red. So you can kind of see before and after. It is kind of subtle, but it is just making the hot dog material look a little bit more smooth and soft. Now I also want to add a little bit of surface bump over the entire hot dog. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the noise texture, and we'll put this down here, and I can control shift and select the noise texture to preview it. Now also with the noise texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I want to use the object coordinates, because if you look right here, you can see the noise texture is a bit stretched on the object. But if I use the object coordinates, it's going to place the texture on the object more evenly. So now I can change the settings of the noise texture. So I'm going to turn the scale to a 16. Let's also make it more detailed by turning the detail to 15, and I'll turn the roughness up to 0.6. So now I want to put this noise texture into the normal to give it a tiny little bit of surface bump so it looks slightly rough. So I'll put the factor into the normal, and I can control shift and select the principled shader. Now this is going to give us some weird shading issues. You can see something just doesn't look right, and that's because we need to convert the black and white data into normal data. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the bump node, and we'll put the bump node in between the noise and the principled shader. Now we want the noise texture factor to be going into the height value instead, so it converts it to bump data, and this way it's going to make the hot dog look really bumpy and noisy. So that is way too strong, so we can change the strength value to make it less strong. So I'm going to turn the bump strength to just a 0.1, so it is very subtle. And also the subsurface really helps in this case, because you can see if I turn the subsurface down, it's going to look just a little bit more sharp and it looks quite rough, but turning up the subsurface weight definitely makes it look more like food and it makes it look more soft. Now another thing that I want to do is make the grilled parts look a little bit more bumpy. So if I select the mustard and the ketchup objects, I'll just press the H key to hide them so I can see that a little bit better. So we'll zoom in here to the grill marks. So I can put the hot dog color into the normal as well to give it some bump there and make the grill marks look a bit more bumpy. So I'll click on the bump node and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. And the normal can go into the normal. So this way we're mixing two bump maps together. So now this hot dog color can go into the height value. So the color map that we painted is going to go into the bump. and we'll just wait for this to load up. And if I turn up the strength, you can see what it's doing. So you can definitely see right there, the darker areas look like they're bumping back in, and they look like they're kind of grilled and burnt away. However, there's some other issues, and that is that it's like really bumpy and kind of pixelated around on the edges. So there's a couple things we're going to do to fix that. One thing that we're going to do to make this look higher quality is we're going to take the linear type right here on the hot dog color, and we can change it to cubic instead. And this is going to make it look quite a bit more smooth. So we'll wait for that to load up. It's in Blender Eevee, so it takes a moment, but you can see how much smoother it is. Now there's still all this noise here, and that's because of the slight gradients that we painted. So what I can do is make this image texture more contrasty. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp between the hot dog color and the bump. So I will just Control Shift and select it so you can see what it's doing. So we're going to make it more contrasty so that all of the hot dog is white, just except the burnt part, which is going to be black. So what I'll do is click on the white tab, and I'll just drag it way over. And so you can see what it's doing is it's making it much more contrasty. So now all the hot dog is super white, but the burnt marks are black. So if I Control Shift and select the bump to preview it, now you can see the burnt marks are the only parts which look bumpy, because the rest of it was fully white. So I can Control Shift and select the principled shader, and now you can see the burnt marks just look like they're going back in more. And let's drag the white tab over even more so that it's a bit smaller. So something like that. Now it's way too strong, so on this bump here I can just turn the strength way down to like a 0.1. But now the toasted parts just look a little bit more bumpy. And that is going to be it for the hot dog material. So let's press Alt-H to unhide all the objects, and we're now going to be texture painting the hot dog bun. So let's select the hot dog bun, and we'll go back here to the UV editing, and you can see it appears as though it's already UV unwrapped. That's because we added a cube, and the default primitive objects in Blender are already UV unwrapped, but you can see there's going to be a lot of stretching and stuff because we edited the object. So we need to re-UV unwrap this. So select the mesh in edit mode, we'll hit the U button, and we'll do the Smart UV project, and here in the island margin, just like we did before, I'm going to go with a 0.01 and click on OK. There's a little bit of space between the islands, and that will work fine, just a basic UV unwrap. So now we can go over here to the shading, and we can add a new material, and I can just call it Hot Dog Bun. And then we need to add a new texture that we can paint on. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for an image texture. Let's drop this down here, and let's click on new to create a new image texture. And the width and height here, I'm going to also use a 2K image like we did before. And on the name here, I'll rename this to Hot Dog Bun. Now, if you want to use the same color that I'm going to use for the base color of the hot dog bun, you can click on the color and go to the hex, and you can punch in E6 A065. So I'll just be using kind of this light tannish peachy color. And then let's click on new image. And we can put the color into the base color so that it's being previewed on the hot dog bun. So let's save this project again, and then we'll go over here to texture painting, and I can drag this down to make it smaller. And let's scroll up here, and I'm going to click on the grilled, and I'll change it back to the text draw, which is the default. And also, if I scroll down here on the side panel, I do want to make sure that that bleed there is still turned to 5, because I find that you can have some issues with clipping or texturing issues on the edge of the UV map if you don't turn the bleed up just a little bit. Now, what I also want to do is hide the other objects so I can just see the main object. So what we can do is we could hide the other objects, but we can also hit the / on the numpad. And this is going to go into the local view. So local view is basically meaning that you're just going to preview the object which is selected. The other way to do this is by clicking here on the view setting, and then you can go down here to local view, and you can toggle the local view or remove from local view. So let's press the F key to make the brush smaller. Let's turn the strength up a little bit. And now what I want to do is add this to the color palette just in case we want to go back to it. So right over here, we'll click on the plus here. That's going to add that color there in the color palette. But now what I want to do is make a lighter color, and we're going to texture paint a lighter color inside the center of the bread. So we'll click here on the color. We're going to make this a bit lighter and more of a kind of a whitish, yellowish color. And the hex value that I'll be using is going to be FED 9B3. And then here again on the color palette, I'll add this to the color palette just in case I want to go back to it. So now I can start to tap along here, and let's actually make the brush a little bit less strong, and I can just make the inside of the bread a little bit lighter because the outside of the bread is a bit more toasted and cooked, but inside the bun, that's where you cut the bun open. So it's going to be a little bit brighter and a little bit whiter because it's inside the bread. Just add that lighter color all around, maybe turn the strength up a little bit, and then go here in the center, make that a bit brighter. All right, that's pretty good. You could even go here to the color and just really quick make it like a fully white color, and then just go along here and add just a tiny little bit of a white color so you can see it's kind of that bread color, then it gets lighter, and then the very center is just super white. So that's looking pretty nice. Let's also click back here to go to that lighter color, and I can make the strength a bit smaller, and then we can just go along here and just add a bit kind of like of a bleeding, so it's kind of coming up a little bit so that it just looks a little bit more organic and natural. So I'm just going to add a little bit of lighter color kind of on the edges there, so something like that. So it's a little bit more kind of noisy or cloudy. Now if we go to the other side of the bun, I want to make this side look like it's a little bit more toasted and kind of make it look a bit more brown. So let's go here to the color, and if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using, you can use BB6232 as the hex value, and then let's click on the plus here to add it to the color palette so we can go back to it if we need to. And I'll turn the strength down of my brush, and then I can just go along here, kind of tap along, and just make it look slightly toasted. Just going along there just like that. That's actually looking pretty tasty. So it looks like maybe they put the bun on the grill and kind of toasted it a little bit, just kind of cooked it a little bit, made it a bit more dry and crispy. And then the very center here, go along and just make that a little bit stronger or a bit darker. Also on the color here, you could make it slightly more red if you want to, and then just add a slight bit of red to make it look a little bit more toasted and a little bit cooked, something like that. Just a little bit of red, but you don't want to overdo it too much. And then let's go here to the soften brush. And I'll go along here and just soften this a little bit because it looks like there were a little bit of edges that needed to be softened. If you make your brush smaller, the soften brush won't be quite as laggy. So you can see like right there, it kind of looks like there's an edge to the color. So if I go along there and kind of soften it, maybe right here, you can just soften that just a little bit. You could also try using the smear brush if you want to. So maybe I'll try using the smear brush, kind of going back and forth and clicking, kind of smearing that edge just a little. All right, so let's now click back here to go to the regular draw brush, but I'm going to click here on this button and we're going to choose the grilled brush that we made already. So I'll press the F key to make my brush bigger. Let's make sure the strength is way down, and this brush is going to be using the noise, and also make sure it's a white color. So I can now just go along here and just add a little bit of kind of cooked or burnt areas just here and there. Should be pretty subtle. I don't want to overdo it. All right, and right over here inside, you could also just add a little bit here and there. All right. Just along here, kind of along the top, and maybe just a few spots along the bottom. All right, something like that, but I do want it to be pretty subtle. All right, and that will be it. So I like how the texture painting is. So let's drag this out here. There's our painted image. So you can see there's that little star there next to image telling us that we haven't saved it yet. So let's click on image and click on save as. And I'll save this as hot dog bun as a PNG file. With my other files, we'll click on save as. Let's press Ctrl S to save the project. And I can go here to the shading workspace, and now we can create the rest of the material to make it look a bit more like a stylized bread. So I want to add the same ambient occlusion setup that we did for the hot dog. So what I'll do is go to the add menu, I can search for the ambient occlusion, and we'll put this above the hot dog bun texture. Let's drag these out so we have a bit more space. I also want to go to the add menu, and I want to add the mix color node so we can mix the ambient occlusion and the hot dog bun together. So we'll stick it right here, and the ambient occlusion color, this is going to go into the factor, and then the hot dog bun color can go into color A. So now in the mix type here, we can change it to darken, and color B is going to be fully black. Then just like we did before, we need to invert it. So we'll go to the add menu and I'll search for the invert color, and we'll stick this after the ambient occlusion. So now you can see here when both of the objects get really close, it kind of looks darker, and that kind of gives a nice stylized effect to the shading. Now what I also want to do is change the roughness a bit. So I'll just turn the roughness up to like a 0.6. And to make it look a little bit more like food, I also want to turn up the subsurface. So here on the subsurface, let's turn the weight all the way up to 1. And to make it look a little bit more red, we'll turn the random walk type to skin instead, and then I'll just leave these settings how they are. And then I also want to add a little bit of a noise texture, kind of like we did with the hot dog. So I want to add a noise texture to make it look a bit bumpy and kind of give it more the texture of bread. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll search for a noise texture. Drop this here, and with the noise texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T to use the texture coordinate and mapping, and I want to use the object coordinates, so we'll put the object into the vector, and I can Ctrl Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. And let's change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale up to 30, I'll turn the detail to 15, and the roughness I'll turn up just a little bit to like a 0.55. So it has a little bit more detail. So now the noise texture factor can go into the normal, but we need to convert the color data or the black and white data into normal data so there aren't any shading issues. So I'll go to the add menu, I'm going to search for a bump node, and we'll put the bump node in between the noise and the normal. Let's Control Shift and select the principled shader, and then to convert it properly, the factor needs to be going into the height value of the bump. So now it looks really bumpy, but let's just turn the strength down to like a 0.1 so it's much less bumpy. And I can definitely see that kind of has a look, and it kind of looks like bread because it just has a little bit of noise there. All right, so let's now select the Ketchup here. We'll just select this one here, and we're going to make a material for this. So we'll click on New to add a new material. I'll rename it to Ketchup. So just call it Ketchup. And for the base color here, I'm just going to use this kind of red color, and the hex value will be BF3216 if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using. And also, let's open up the subsurface here to make it look more like food. I'll turn the weight to 1, and the random walk will choose skin instead. And then also, I want to turn the roughness down just a little bit so it's a bit shiny because it is kind of wet. So I'll turn it to a 0.45, so it's a little bit more shiny. And then also, we'll select the mustard. We're going to click on the drop down, and I can choose the ketchup material, but then I want to duplicate this material so it is separate. So we'll click on this little icon here to duplicate the material, and I can rename it to mustard. And then for this color, this is going to be kind of a bright yellowish color, but it will be slightly more orange. And the hex value for this mustard color will be F48A25. And then we have the roughness turned down, and we have the subsurface turned on. So now we have mustard and ketchup. So let's now do the material for the seeds. So I'll zoom over here, and we have the poppy seeds and the sesame seeds. So I'll select the sesame seed. Let's click on new. We'll rename the material to sesame seeds. And here on the roughness, I want to turn the roughness up a bit to like a 0.7 so it's not super shiny. And I also want to open up the subsurface, and we'll turn the subsurface weight up to 1, and I'll just leave it as random walk. That'll help to make it look a little bit more like food. Now I want the sesame seeds to look like they've been toasted a little bit. So I want each sesame seed to be a slightly random different color and have some of them look toasted. So what I'll do is go to the add menu, and I'll search for the object info node, and we're going to put this random value into the base color. Now what this will do, you don't need to follow along with this, but if I duplicate this sesame seed and then continue to duplicate it, you can see that every time the object is duplicated, it's going to randomly generate colors from white to black. That's what the random is doing. So let me just delete these. So I'll click on this one again. So this way, when we distribute all the seeds on the bun, some of them will look slightly toasted. Now I want to change the colors, so the random colors here. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'll search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp between the object info and the principled shader. Now on the black tab here, I'm going to make this a brown color, and I'm going to use a hex value of 261101. And then this color here, this is going to be kind of the classic sesame seed color. So it'll be kind of a lightish, yellowish, peachy color. And for this one, I will use a hex value of C1A469. And then I'm going to hold down the control key and click here to add another tab. And I'm going to make a slightly different color for this one. And this one is going to be a hex value of C19853. So if I duplicate this and continue to duplicate it many times, you can see some of these sesame seeds look like they've been toasted, like this dark one. So that'll look great on the hot dog bun. So let's select the other seeds, and we'll click on the drop down and choose the sesame seeds, and we'll choose the sesame seeds for that one too. And then let's click on the poppy seed. We'll click on new to make a new material. I'm going to rename this material to poppy seed, and this material will be pretty simple. Let's make the base color kind of a dark color, kind of a dark brown. I'll use a hex value of 261101, and then also I'll turn the roughness up a bit to like a 0.7, and if I open up the subsurface here, I'll turn the subsurface weight all the way up to 1. So that's going to be it for that material. So now we'll be using a geometry node setup to place the seeds on the hot dog bun. So I'll select the hot dog bun, and we'll save the project again. And let's now click over here to go to the Geometry Nodes workspace. If you don't have the Geometry Nodes workspace, you can click on the plus right over here if you scroll over, and then you can go to General and choose the Geometry Nodes. So I have the 3D viewport here, and then I have the Geometry Node editor right here. Let's click on New to add new geometry nodes, and it will add it here as a modifier. And I can rename it just to Seeds. So we'll create a simple geometry node setup to place the seeds on the bun. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the distribute points on faces node, drop this here. We're also going to go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the instance on points node, and we'll drop it after the distribute points on faces. Now you can see the hot dog bun has disappeared. That is because we need to go to the add menu. We need to search for the join geometry. We want to put the join geometry after the instance on points, and the original mesh's geometry needs to go up to the join geometry, and that'll add back the original mesh. So let's just drag this down here. Now we want to put the seeds collection onto the bun. So I'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for the collection info so that we can get the data of the seeds. So we'll drop this here, and on the drop down, we're going to choose the seeds collection. Now the instance here can go to the instance on points, so we'll stick this here. And you can see now the seeds are distributed, but they're kind of like floating, and the seeds are also all together in a group. So to fix this, we're going to click on separate children, reset children, and pick instance. And that way, now you can see that the seeds are randomly on the hot dog bun. And I can turn up the density to see more of them. Now there's a problem with this, and that is that the seeds are all pointed out in this direction, but I want the seeds to be flat along the hot dog bun. So what I want to do is put a value into the rotation. So this distribute points on faces, this has a rotation value, and that rotation value is the rotation of each one of the faces of the normals. So each face has a normal rotation, and that's the way that the face is pointing. So we want to use this rotation and put that into the rotation. However, what I want to do is also add another node. So we're going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for the rotate rotation node. And we'll drop this here. And let's drag these back so we have a bit more space. So the rotation data, this is going to go into the bottom one, the rotate by, and then we want to put the rotation here into the rotation. Now, why I'm adding this rotate rotation is because you can see that each one of these seeds is just pointed down, and so that just looks really weird, but each seed should randomly have a different rotation. So we're going to add a random value to randomly rotate the seeds around. So we'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the random value node. We'll drop this here. And then on the float here, we're going to change this to vector instead. And this is going to break up the X, Y, and Z values. So the value now can go into the rotation. So now you can see each seed is randomly rotated around because of the maximum and minimum values. Now on the maximum here, I'm going to turn all these values to 0 because I don't want to randomly rotate it. Like especially here, I don't want to rotate that because the seeds will look like they're popping out. I only want to rotate it on this bottom one here, and that's going to rotate the seeds around, but they're still going to be flat onto the bun. Now you could make it a giant number if you want to, but I'm going to click here and I'm going to type TAU for tau. And that is some sort of math equation, but what that's going to do is create this number here, and that is going to make sure that it's the right number to rotate all the way around randomly by 360 degrees. So if I go back to object mode, go into the rendered view, you can kind of see that they're flat, but they're also going along the hot dog bun, but they're also at a random rotation. So that's going to be great. And you can change the random seed if you want to change that, but that's looking great. Now, if I turn this density up really big, eventually some of the seeds are going to start to overlap, like right here. Now, it might be okay if some of the seeds overlap, but I want to make sure the seeds don't overlap just because that just doesn't look super realistic. So we'll turn the density down. I'll just turn it down to like a 10, and then I'll click on the random here, and I'm going to change it to Poisson disk instead. Now, Poisson disk is going to give us a distance minimum. So I can turn the distance minimum up to a very small number, like a 0.02, and this way there's going to be a minimum distance in between each one of the seeds. So now if I turn the density max up, I can run up to a giant number, but you can see even if I turn up more and more, the seeds are not going to overlap. So there's a little bit of distance in between the seeds. And that actually looks pretty tasty. That looks like maybe like some sort of bagel with a bunch of like bagel topping, but that is way too many seeds. I don't want that many. So on this density max, I'm just going to turn this to like a 700. Now also, I want to change the scale, and I want there to be a little bit of a random scale. So I can click on the random value, and I'll press Shift-D to duplicate it and drop it here. And then with the random value selected, I'll hit the backspace, and that is going to reset the node so it goes back here to float. Now, this instance on points has a scale value, so we can change the X, Y, and Z values to change the scale of each one of the seeds. But I'm going to put the value into the scale. This way, it's going to randomly generate values for the seeds between the minimum, which is 0, and the maximum, which is 1. So I can just turn the minimum up a bit. I'll turn it up to like a 0.5, and the maximum I can turn down a bit to like maybe a 0.6 or a 0.7. So just play around with it to how you like. So maybe a 0.7 and a 0.5 is pretty good. So you can see some seeds are bigger and some seeds are smaller. And then also here on the density max, you could turn this up a little bit more. I might turn this up to like an 800 or maybe even like a 900. So there's a little bit more seeds. And you could also turn down the distance min, but make sure you don't turn it down too far or else the seeds might overlap. So something like that is pretty good. Now another problem is that the seeds are also over here on the back, but that doesn't really make sense because when you cut the bun open, there wouldn't be seeds inside there. So what I'm going to do is click on the hot dog and press H to hide it and also hide the ketchup and mustard. And we're going to just select the hot dog bun. And what I want to do is vertex paint away where I don't want the seeds to be. So we're going to click here on object mode, and we actually want to use the weight paint. So we're going to be weight painting where we want the seeds to be. So we'll go to weight paint. So you can see that it looks blue on default. And so the blue is where there isn't going to be any of the seeds. If I press the F key, make my brush bigger, and then start to paint here, it's going to start out as blue and then get closer and closer to red. And when it's red, there's going to be lots of seeds. Now, as I'm painting, it's not showing up. That's because I need to take the density factor and I need to put that into this extra socket here. Now I need to open up the side panel, and instead of using a single factor value, I want to click on the input attribute toggle, which is going to use the values instead. So we can click on the density factor, and we want to use the point group float here. And this is going to use the data that we've painted. So now if I paint along here, you can see the seeds are just showing up where we paint. So I'll make this smaller, and I can just go along here, make my brush pretty big, and I want to paint all the values except kind of the inside. So we'll just go along here and paint that entire edge. You could also kind of zoom out and just paint that really big like that. But you can see right here, I want to just leave that without any of the seeds. So go along here, you can kind of make it kind of noisy or bumpy going back and forth just to make it look a bit more random if you want to. Maybe even have a few occasional spots here and there where it's kind of bumping forward a bit. So there might be a little bit of seeds coming in, and then down here, also do the same thing. All right, just making it a little bit random on the edge, and then right over here as well. But all in here, I want this to be like fully red. So paint that all in and make it pretty red. All right, so that's pretty good. So now we don't really have seeds there, maybe just a few here and there randomly, but for the most part, other than kind of just on the sides here, it's just going to be red on the outside. All right, so we'll click on weight paint. We'll go back to object mode, and I'll press Alt-H to unhide the objects. So there we go. We now have the bun with the seeds. And one more thing, I think this density max here, I'm going to turn this up just a little bit more to like 1,000, maybe even like 1,200, because I just want a little bit more seeds. So let's go back here to the layout. I'll press Ctrl S to save the project again, and I want to select the bun. And we'll go to front view. Actually, we'll go to side view by hitting the 3 on the numpad. And I can rotate the bun and move it down here. You could maybe scale it up if you want to. All right, and then I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I'll rotate it. And I'll just stick it right down here, move it over. Maybe rotate that over a little bit. And you could even select the hot dog, and you could select the mustard and ketchup and move them up a little bit if you want to. Let's also click and drag to box select the seeds, and we can move them over. Actually, what we can just do to hide the seeds is to just go here to the outliner and click on the check mark there just to hide the seeds from the view. Let's now add a camera. So I'll go to the add menu. We'll go here to camera, just add a normal camera. You can move the camera somewhere around here and then press Ctrl Alt and numpad 0 to bring the camera to your view. Now I also want to zoom the camera in a bit to make things look a bit more flat. So if we click on the object data properties of the camera, I can turn the focal length up. So I'll turn it up to like 100 just to kind of zoom it in. And then I can hit G to grab, and then I can double tap the Z key to bring the camera in and out. And I'll just bring that out a bit, maybe bring it up. I can also hit R to rotate, and then I can double tap the X key to rotate it up and down. And I'll just have it coming down here at a bit of an angle, bring it in a little bit like that. And then let's also click and drag to box select these objects. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, move it over, and I can rotate this and just kind of set up a basic scene here with both of the hot dogs. So maybe rotate that over. I can also box select this hot dog, and I'll double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation, and I can rotate it up a little bit so I can see kind of the side there of the bun. And you can also select the light and double tap the R key for the trackball rotation and just kind of rotate the light to how you like it. So just press Ctrl S to save the project, and then you can click on render and click on render image, or you can press F12. And since it's using Blender Eevee, it shouldn't take that long to render. So now we'll just do a little bit of compositing and save the image. So I'll click here to go to the compositing layout. Let's click on Use Nodes, so we can use the compositing nodes. And because we enabled the Node Wrangler add-on, I can hold down the Control and Shift key and select the render layers to preview it. Let's box select these nodes and drag the viewer and the composite back a little bit. And I'll press the V key to zoom out the backdrop, or you can press Alt V to zoom in the backdrop. And if you don't see the backdrop, make sure to click on the backdrop button right there. So the first thing that I want to do is make it a little bit more contrasty. So I'll go to the Add menu and I'll search for the RGB curves. Let's click on the RGB curves and drop it right here between the render layers and viewer, and I can put the image up to the compositing. Now, if I click here to add a dot, I can pull this up a little bit, and then I can click here to add another dot, and I can drag this down a bit. So by adding a little subtle curve there, it's going to make it a bit more contrasty. You can see here it is before and here is after. So it's kind of a little bit sharper, a little bit more contrasty. I kind of like that a bit better. Kind of gives it a stylized look. And then I also want to add a bit of a background. So this alpha here, that is going to be the transparency. If I hold down the Control and Shift key and select the render layers twice, that is going to show me just the outline of the hot dog because the background is transparent. So we can use this to create a background. So I'll go to the Add menu and I'm going to search for the blur and we'll put it up here. And then the alpha can go into the blur image. And I'll Control Shift and select the blur to preview it. Now here on the blur X and Y values, I'm going to turn these both to 200. And you might need to change this depending on the size of your output. So I actually rendered this, if I go here to the output properties, I rendered this as a 2K image. So 2560 by 1440. You can just render it at 1080p or whatever you want, but the blur here will depend on how big your resolution is. So 200 for me is pretty good. And we're going to use this to kind of create a bit of a fake shadow behind the objects. So now what I want to do is go to the Add menu. We're going to search for a color ramp. We'll put this after the blur, and we can use the color ramp to make the colors. So I'm first going to flip both of these values. So I'll drag the white tab over here, and then the black tab I'll drag kind of to about here. Now for the background, I am going to use this kind of brown color. And if you want to use the same value that I'm using, the hex value is going to be 6F5039. So that's what we're going to use for the backdrop. So now I want to mix it in here to the render layers and the composite in the viewer. So I'll go to the Add menu and I'm going to search for the alpha over node. And we'll put the alpha over after the RGB curves. So now we can take the color ramp image and we're going to put that into the top one, and the RGB curves is going to go into the bottom one. And let's Control Shift and select the alpha over to preview it. So now you can see there's a little bit of a shadow there, kind of like a fake shadow, and that is nice for the backdrop, and it kind of pops the hot dogs out because there's a bit of a shadow. And then one more thing that I want to do is add a small vignette to kind of add a little bit of a darkness around the edges. So I'll drag the composite in the viewer over, and I'll select the alpha over. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. And then we can put the viewer and the composite both up to this alpha over. To create the vignette, we're first going to create a box, and then we're going to blur the box and stick it here on top of the image. So I'll go to the Add menu and I'll search for the box mask. We'll drop it here. And if you select the box mask, you can see there's going to be a little box there, and I can click and drag to make it bigger. And I can drag out the width and the height, and I'm going to drag them out until the box is pretty big, so you can kind of see it up there. So it's pretty big. It's almost the same size as the final image, but it's a little bit smaller. So now what I can do is blur this box. So I'll go to the Add menu and I'm going to search for another blur node. We'll stick this here, and the mask is going to go up to the image. And I can Control Shift and select the blur to preview it. So now here on the X and Y, I'm going to turn these both to 300. That works pretty well for my scene. And it is going to be really hard to see if you Control Shift and select it. There is a little bit of a blur there, so it's basically blurring that box. It is really hard to see, but you'll be able to see it better when it's on top of the other image. So we're going to put this blur into the factor, and I can Control Shift and select the alpha over. Now this alpha over here, this is coming from the original image. That is going to go into the bottom one. And then when this composites, you can see there's that white outline around the outside. And that is because of this image right here. So this image, we're just going to make this fully black. And now when this loads up here, you can see there's just a little bit of a dark area around the edges. And I might turn this blur down to just like a 200 because I think 300 was a little bit large. So that is the final image. So to save this image, you can select the viewer node. you can press the N key to open the side panel. You can click here on Node, and then click on Save this image. And I'll just save this as hot dog as a PNG file, and I'll click on Save as Image. And that's gonna finish it up for this stylized hot dog tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel, as well as purchase the finished project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and Patreon page with the links in the description. And also on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, you can get access to lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, and you'll be helping to support the channel, so I really appreciate your support. Now, if you'd like to watch some other tutorials which are similar to this, I have some other stylized food tutorials. So I have a tune style lemonade tutorial that I created somewhat recently. You can check that out with the link in the description. I also made a pizza tutorial a little while back. I also created a hot dog factory satisfying looping animation, so that's a fun one to do if you're interested. I also have a few procedural food materials like a fried chicken material, a procedural hamburger material, and a procedural biscuit material. So if you're interested in checking out any of those tutorials, I'll have all the links in the video description. But that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.